Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first ever edition of iMind, where I mind, you mind. So, Stay, can you please explain to us what iMind is?
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for that. So, as Matt has said, this is our first ever iMind edition. And so, iMind is a platform for people of opposing sides to come together and just have a discussion. So, the discussion is agreeing on a notion or a statement. And when someone agrees on something regarding of their stance, they will be put on spotlight. As easy as that. So, maybe, Adriel, you can perhaps tell us what the purpose of iMind is?
Okay, so what exactly is the purpose of iMind? Well, I'm here to tell you that the purpose of iMind is simply to see if people from opposing sides can agree on something, or in other words, to find a middle ground.
Thanks, Adriel. So, Lun, who are the people included in iMind?
From the substantive affair, we have Stephanie, myself, Luna, Adriel, Kiki, and Matea. With our friends from the operations division, we have Adinda and Matthew. And for our participants, the ones who agree that it's a right are Eska, Vanya, and Anas, while the ones who agree that it's a privilege are Rachel, Chella, and Jade.
Thank you so much for introducing us, Luna. So, without further ado, Kiki, what's next on our schedule?
All right, with that being said, let's just jump straight into the premiere of our first ever iMind. Is fluency in English a right or a privilege? Stay back to your seats, grab your popcorn, and enjoy the ride.
Without further ado, we are going to begin with the first notion of whether fluency is a privilege or a right.
It is something that you are bestowed accessibility to, and it is also something that can be expected to be received from a person. Fluency is something that you have to work towards, but there's also a multitude of opportunities given to you. If the expectancy that somebody would be fluent in English does not exist, then we wouldn't be able to have English as an education in our national education in every province, every city in our dear old country. And since everyone in their mandatory learning receives this kind of education, I personally think that it's a right because the government, to an extent as the entity in charge of the education, believes that everyone should be able to understand English and be fluent in it, with the supporting institutions of them being online and the accessibility of the internet supporting it from just not just being in school.
Okay, so in my opinion, I would say that the education or the subject of English can be a right, but to the extent of being a fluent or someone is fluent, that is another level of English that is already in the realm of privilege. Why? Because I think that the parameter of fluency doesn't only talk about whether you are being taught English in school. Everyone is being taught English in school right now, and only minimum of them can be set as fluent. But there are extra steps for you in order to be fluent. For example, you need to be able to access, for example, like TV cables or Netflix, for example, to be able to learn by yourself to have English. Or for example, you have extra English lessons in by other people, for example. So I think those kind of things are already a privilege, not only a privilege in terms of economy, but also are you culturally privileged to be living in a society where English needs to be fluent. So I think the education of English can be a right, but to the extent of fluency, it will be a privilege.
Now we're going to continue to the second notion of fluency means English usage at a native level.
I don't think it's going to be fair if we compare fluency with natives and with English as second language speakers, because we're never going to reach that level. It's almost impossible, especially if we learned English as an adult, I think. So I think I agree. It should be judged by how you can understand people and how people can understand you in English.
I think I can say that I agree with all of you. I think to well, maybe perhaps to some extent, some people can actually reach those native level, but not everyone can. Like it's really hard to achieve those because the knowledge of vocabularies, the comfortability in using English for native speaker and for non-native are completely different. Like just imagine someone already use that particular language since they are basically learned speaking for the first times in comparison to me, for example, that only learned English for 6 years. It is even still really hard for me to say certain words like harder or English. It feels weird in my mouth, and I believe that most non-native speakers are going to feel the same. It's going to feel weird to say or to actually write certain things in English. Therefore, I cannot say it is completely fair for us to make native level as a standard of fluency. I think that's all. Yeah.
Okay, next up on the notions list, do standardized English tests such as TOEFL and IELTS indicate fluency?
To be fluent, which means that you must be able to convey your thoughts and be able to communicate with each other, and to ensure that there is no misunderstanding between that, there is no miscommunication, which means that there's a requirement of a standard. Yes, that's why we need these tests to standardize.
Standardized tests only measures your fluency to a certain extent, meaning that in standardized tests, you're asked, for example, grammars, or do you understand reading comprehension, or your speaking, or such things, but it doesn't really test whether you are comfortable in having conversational in the long run. So it's only in a short time period, like 5 to 10 minutes, I would say. So one thing that I found interesting from standardized tests is that everyone which wants to take standardized class, they will have like lessons, like 10 weeks lessons or comprehensive lessons to be able to excel those kind of tests, right? So I think this actually measures and also teaches people to be much more sensible to English, making that, for example, when are you going to use a, the, or n, for example, those things will actually trigger us to be able to be much more grammatically fluent, I would say. So to some extent, yes, but it doesn't really measure whether you are comfortable in speaking English in the long run.
I think with all of those tasks being like, if you want to make all of those tests as the standard of being fluent in English, I think that should be taken as the bare minimum instead, because as Karisha have said before, it doesn't really indicate your fluency. If we are using the definition of fluency that we have discussed in the previous notion, we all agreed that fluency means that you can converse comfortably, and you can continue talking with someone with any topic and basically understand each other, and it goes both ways. Meanwhile, in these tests, it's not really, you're just like completing questions after questions and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that should be the bare minimum instead of something that could like just become a value of how much you are fluent in your English, of how good are your English skills or something like that.
Moving on, we have the notion of fluency's urgency.
Like it or not, the ability to speak English at an adequate level, at a fluent level, is rising, and you need a basic understanding of English to be able to elevate yourself to an extent. I mean, most of the media that we consume, both on our private devices or on national media like television or radio, they are in English. And pull as many jokes as you like, being able to speak English fluency is a valuable skill for everyone to have. And to many like salaryman level jobs, being able to speak English is it's something that would elevate your worth in your office.
If we take the parameter of fluency as in our English is understandable, that means that it is urgent because we need to be able to defend ourselves. Some people only understand English only by hearing it, but then they are not able to speak or respond it in English. But that is not fluency that we're talking about. So I would say that fluency becomes urgent because you need to be able to defend yourself. You need to be able to explain what you want to actually minimize misunderstanding. For example, like the word beach will be much more similar to that word or that word, right? So at least you need to be able to be understood by people, and you need to be able to make sure that your idea actually makes into the context that you're talking about. And yeah, that actually makes you much more that also increases your self-worth, as what Eska explained, that right now it is really demanding. But unfortunately, when we're looking at Indonesia, and also I'm taking my argument, my first argument, like I still think that English is still a privilege, because even though there is a reason for English being in our national curriculum, but we still see in Indonesia that some people still joke about English, like they're unable to speak English, and that actually shows how inadequate our curriculum is. And hence, for people that are able to speak English fluently, obviously they have much more privilege, they have much more access to materials in English, they have their friends who actually like to speak in English, or they can achieve like lessons that is really expensive. So yeah, I think at this point it is really urgent, but really unfortunately the access right now that we're having is currently lacking.
Now for our final notion, is Indonesians born and raised can't have English as their mother tongue?
Oh God, I can only remember the Indonesian proverb for this, but it's di situ tanah dipijak, di sana langit dijunjung. I believe that if this is where you were, if this is like where you were born, this is where you grew up in, you should be able to speak Indonesian. Mother tongue implies that this is your first language. English is a right. You can be as fluent in English as you are in Indonesian, which I believe myself to be, but I would never acknowledge anything other than Indonesian as my mother tongue, which is to say that Indonesian born and raised, for example, you have a parent that is another nationality, or they have another language as their mother tongue, and they bestow that language towards you. So you grew up speaking maybe at least two or three languages, which is your parents' mother tongue aside from Indonesian. That's completely fair. You can call that your mother tongue because that's what you are given. But if you're talking about Indonesians in the sense that both your parents are native Indonesians and you have Indonesian grandparents, no matter what ethnicity they come from, you should be considering Indonesian as your mother tongue, and Indonesian should be the language that you are most fluent in, not English, not Chinese, not anything else. If you do consider yourself to be Indonesian. If you do have foreign-born parents and you consider yourself to be, yeah, well, I'm more like half this and half that, instead of having Indonesian as your first answer, you have a different national identity from the get-go. I'm not against exactly people who are like that, but I just find it a little like there's a little ick inside of me where there's people who are like completely or like fully Indonesian, and they say that they are, but they speak bad Indonesian and they're much better at like English just because that's the environment that they grew up in, or they don't speak Indonesian. They only speak Indonesian because that's how they communicate with, I don't know, their housemaids, drivers, and sellers on the street. Because that means that in their head, it's a foreign language. It's a language for someone who is not part of them, because that's not the language that they speak with their parents. That's the language that they speak with their friends. It actually becomes a language of the lesser. Meanwhile, you guys are living here. You were born here. You need to give this land, these languages, these cultures, the respect that it warrants from having you be in this country. It's one thing. I mean, it's one thing to be not being able to speak Indonesian, but it's another thing to like be so bad at it that you don't consider it your mother tongue, even though you are Indonesian descent and you were born and raised here. I don't see how that could happen. And if that happens, I would think that that's a very negative thing, to be honest.
Okay, as we have it, Before we end this session, I want to say thank you to everyone who's been participating in this session of iMind. Thank you all and see you all later. Thank you.